Good morning, chess fans. We are playing the last of the three of the 1800 bots. Julia from Holland, who plays, not unpredictably, the Dutch. And there it is, F5. Some news from the Max Murray household. I bought 6 Auto Synclist or Auto Catfish for my 55-gallon Tetra community tank. The catfish is a well-known allergy eater, and I'm hoping that will help control an allergy problem in my 55. This morning we are having good coffee and bad chess. I'm working my way through the chess.com bots, the advanced section, which starts at a 1500 rating and ends at a 2100 rating. Each section has approximately 2 or 3 individuals of the same rating. Julia, the third of the 1800s, as I've already mentioned. But if you are who you say you are, a superstar, and you have no fear, the lights are on, the cameras are here, and they want to know. All right, the Dutch. I play the first same 5 moves against every single formation. I've had a lot of experience against the Dutch now at this point, because it does show up a lot with these bots for some reason. Yesterday's game was a slobber knocker. Yesterday's game clocked in at 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 58 seconds. That's almost 3 hours or 180 minutes of chess action for those of you doing the mathematics at home. That is quite long. Granted, most of that lengthy chess game was me yakking my jaws rather than pushing wood around the chessboard. Today we're being a little more expeditious. Now I will now make, with a flourish, the distinguishing move of the Max Murray chess opening system. A system which, as far as I know, has no real name other than sometimes it is referred to by the bots as the Yusupov-Rubinstein variation. Both men known as deep 4-pawn players from the history and legends of chess. And now I'm finally going to get my king castled, completing the first 5 moves and establishing my system. I get a share of the center. That's number 1. Number 2, I develop my minor pieces and get them into the game. Number 3, I castle, so my rook is closer to the center where opening lines are most likely to happen during the first moves of the game. Number 4, my king has safety in the corner or the board. He's easier to attack because he's tucked away on one side. Number 5, he has a rigid pawn shield in front of him, although I can and will often play the Luft-making move, h2, h3. So my king has an escape hatch off the back rank to h2 should back rank mate tactics abound. That, chess fans, is my opening system. Today I'm going to try and refrain so we don't run into another 2 hour and 52 minute slobber knocker. I'm going to refrain from talking at length about the Colley system, where the light squared bishop for white comes to the d3 square, more active, objectively a stronger square for the bishop to be on in the opening because it supports a central pawn advance with e5 and also targets the king side, specifically black's h7 pawn. However, the bishop is more tactically vulnerable on d3. It is in the center itself where there will be a lot of action. And it can and is often attacked by either the black knight, which comes to the b4 square, or by an advancing c-pawn, which goes to c7, c5, and then c4, harassing the knight. For that reason, c3 is often played. But c3, not as aggressive as the move that I'm going to play in this situation. I'm going into my standard opening setup now with c4. And black plays d5. Black has set up this triangle. The triangle, very solid. We're not seeing like the Leningrad Dutch where black would essay a move g6 and fianchetto the bishop to g2 or g7 to the long dark square diagonal. I've noticed by watching my own videos, enthralled by the sound of my own voice, that I do suffer from chess dyslexia, which I often call rooks, knights, and bishops, queens, and so on. And I get my chessboard turned around quite a bit. I'm taking white to the coordinate. So the coordinate, when I say the coordinates, sometimes I get them backwards. Your patience is appreciated. Oh, bless me. Woo, woo, doggies. A lot of pollen so far. We're having an excellent spring in the state of Missouri along the banks of the mighty and muddy Mississippi River. Now the issue becomes, how do I develop my queenside? Surprisingly, there is a lot of nuance here. You would think for someone who just threw out this same 5 moves in the opening that I would simply continue in a similar vein with my queenside. I am learning, though, through rote practice, game after game after game, and I've had hundreds now in this formation with the white pieces. I'm learning that there is a lot of nuance to how this queenside can and should be developed. First thing is, black has made a certain amount of my decision making very easy because black has put a death grip, a white knuckled death grip on my e4 square. There will not be e3 to e4 anytime in my future. Most likely black plans to put a knight there. That is my bugbear, but I do have an antidote waiting in the wings in the person of my pawn on f2, who will advance to f3 and kick any knight that what is the word? That persists in trying to settle on e4. That's not the word. Impertinently. Impertinent. Is that the word? Impertinent black knight sitting on my e4 square. As you know, if you follow along with the Max Murray Show, I'm your host, Max Murray, playing these chess games. You know that black knights outposted on my side of the board and supported by pawns is what keeps me awake at night. I have tremendous difficulty playing against well-posted knights. All right. So, black has developed the queen to e7. In the process of making our first 5 moves, we've paid hardly any attention to what black is doing. It's not necessarily because there's really nothing black can do to stop me from getting into the Max Murray position. I don't know what to call this opening. I'm going to come up with a name. If you can suggest a name for these first 5 moves, d4, knight to f3, e3, bishop, e2, and double O, please write it down in the doobly-doo below because I need suggestions. I would like to name it after myself, I suppose, just for the purposes of the Max Murray Show YouTube channel and you, my dear friends, chess fans. Because that's not impertinent to say. I'm not foisting my opening name on the entire chess community where there would have to be some sort of consensus and agreement, and I certainly lack the stature to deign to think that I can name a chess opening after myself. I did invent a funny gambit in the Ruy Lopez, and I say invent because I'm not sure if I ever really saw it before. It was a fianchettoing type gambit, and I called it the Springdale Gambit because I lived in Springdale in Connecticut at the time. I've thought about calling this opening system of mine the St. Louis attack, but it is not. There is no attack. Believe me, there is no attack with the bishop on e2, and that's not the purpose of this opening. It is not an attack. But St. Louis opening doesn't have the same cachet to it as St. Louis attack. Maybe it's the St. Louis attack when you play c2, c4, and I can sort of try to gaslight people that c2, c4 is putting a lot of pressure on the center, and that constitutes an attack. So St. Louis number, the Max Murray seems a mouthful. The Murray opening, possible. That's kind of bland. I don't know what to call it. So, if you like, just for the purposes of this YouTube channel, just for the purposes of exposition, and the exhibition that I'm putting on here against the chess.com bots advanced section rated 1500 all the way up to 2100. Come up with a name and we can use it, chess fans together, you and I, right here on the Max Murray Show YouTube. This Julia's the third of the bots. I mentioned that yesterday. I had the Titanic game against Wally, and I am proud to announce that I performed fairly decently there within my goals. I had an 89.7% overall accuracy for the game. That's good. I'm aiming for a 90% accuracy, and I want to beat an 85% accuracy. So I was right in there at 89.7% accuracy over that long game at 60 something moves. In addition, I played at a 2,150 rating according to the game review tool, and I only made, wait for this, I only made 3 inaccuracies. There were no mistakes, no misses, and no blunders. Oh, correction, there was one miss. I did miss something on the board. I don't remember what it is now when I looked at the game in review. By comparison, Wally, my opponent, who's supposed to be rated at 1800, played at a 2000 level, so where's the truth in advertising there? I had a Titanic struggle. I had 6 inaccuracies and made 2 mistakes, so I was able to take advantage. The other interesting thing about yesterday's game, and I know we were going to focus a minute in today's game, but the other interesting thing about yesterday's game was my advantage grew steadily in a upward inclining 45-degree line from the left to the right, meaning I got an advantage and then I prosecuted it and increased my advantage until checkmate ensued on the board. That's gratifying to see. The issue is, of course, that did not comport with my own intuition of what was going on during the game itself. I seem to be consistently overestimating the strength of the computer's position. Now, let's take a breath again for a moment. We are in move 6. I have played my perfunctory move c4. That's my first system for developing my queen side. That's the primary tool, if you will. That's plan A. Plan A, c4, knight c3, b3, bishop b2. Plan A, followed by rook c1. Plan A for development on my queen side. Very, very solid, very efficient. And once I've done that, I'm going to be hard to beat from that position by black, honestly. Now, I'm not going to have an overwhelming advantage, not by a long shot, but I will have probably at that time a sliver of advantage, because if black plays anything against my opening system that is not symmetrical, where he has something odd like this, the Dutch pawn sitting on f5, typically white comes out of the opening with a very small advantage. When I talk about a sliver advantage, I'm talking 0.25, a quarter of a pawn worth. That's not enough to win the game, obviously, but it is a nice starting point to be 12 moves into the game and not losing, quite honestly. Okay, so that was plan A for develop my queen. So plan B is sometimes do not touch the c pawn, but I've already committed, perhaps rather hastily, to c4 and move 6. The other plan is move b3 and then bishop b2 to the long dark square diagonal, followed by perhaps something like knight b to d2, and then maybe c4, somewhat transposing, but not so much. So c pawn, the plan Charlie, or the third plan, the tertiary plan, is to put my white pawn on c3 to form what I call the Illuminati triangle, sloping down either side from my strong point on d4. The Illuminati triangle has the benefits of really taking control of the dark squares and allowing me to play in the center and allowing me to develop either my bishop or my queen safely to the d3 square. Queen development is going to come important at some point soon. The queen has to get off the back rank to connect the rooks. I learned a lesson against my game yesterday. It was an important one. And I finally, a light bulb went off in my head, and I'm going to share it with you. And this may sound mundane or even trivial to you, but it is something I had not fully internalized. So every Russian schoolboy knows that we must connect the rooks in the opening. They must be able to see each other. The question is why? The answer to that question is because then each rook can support the other. Still a relatively trivial and obvious thing to say. But it came up yesterday when there was activity. There was the potentiality of me grabbing space on the queen side by playing b4, but there was a black queen on a5. So you'll notice if the white pawn comes to b4 with the black queen on a5, or even here where the queen is, the queen will snag that pawn and just take it for free. It's a snack. It'll munch on it. But I had just connected my rooks. So now, quote-unquote, they are supporting each other. And what I didn't look at was the old trick that we should all know, that you can slide a rook over, okay? Slide the rook over, threaten the queen, force her to move away, and then attack the b pawn that is underneath. In this position, black's bishop, I believe, had come out to the anti-Collie square f5, and I could have essentially very temporarily sacrificed my b pawn. The queen takes. I would have tacked down the b file with rook. There was no way to preserve the b7 pawn for black, and I would have planted a rook very firmly on the 7th rank, which then could be followed up again by support by the rook, as the two rooks, tethered as they are by the waist in a chain, are able to guard each other as mayhem ensues in the black position. An incursion. But I didn't think about that. I didn't put all the final dots together, and I thought because the queen was on a5 that there was no way I could play b4 without doing something first preparatory like a3. But no, I could have played b4 in one jump, enabled by my connected rooks. So that is why we are connecting the rooks. That is why we are connecting the rooks, and let's internalize that for a moment. We don't just do it for perfunctory reasons because that's what the Russian schoolboy textbooks say. We need to understand why. And then, perhaps even more importantly, we have to put theory into practice. Once the rooks are connected, our next order of business is to coordinate them in an attack or movement across the chessboard to target. Now, they could also support each other in defense. We'd rather use our heavy pieces for attack. All right, so that all comes out of the whole discussion about I do eventually have to move my queen. Because black does not have a bishop on the anti-Collie square here, f5, looking down at my d3, I can also put my queen very actively to the c2 square. If the pawn were not on f5, I could even fight for the control of the e4 square supported by my queen on c2. But I'm not going to do this queen c2 yet. We're going to continue with the textbook and do knights before bishops. Now he is captured. Black is captured. I think this is somewhat of a strategic error. Black is captured on c4. Note that black cannot support the pawn. I'm going to just focus on the position where I could just yammer on and on and on about stuff like knights before bishops and what the Russian school textbooks say regarding positional play. But we're going to focus on the concrete here. D takes C. Because my knight is on c3, black cannot support this c pawn with the move b5. Nene moose breath, the b5 square is under my control. And it's on your side of the board. Julia, rated 1800 from Holland. But I control it with my knight on c3. The optimal development square for the white knight, by the way, precisely because it controls two very important central squares, e4 and d5, and a square solidly in the camp of black on b5. The knight less developed, less well positioned on b2, but having benefits also, such as defending the other knight and still maintaining a view on e2. I'm sorry, e4. But that's why that's plan sort of B or even C. Plan A is to get the knight here to its most optimal square, c3, after pushing the c pawn. Because if I put the knight here on c3 to start with my pawn on c2, well, then my pawn is backwards and I can't challenge in the center. Because black had played this triangle, this inverted triangle, and taken an iron death grip on my e4 square, I'm not going to play e3, e4, and that means that I'm going to play c4, not c3. One of my learnings again from yesterday, this very calm subtlety, was I had played c4. The computer, surprisingly, shockingly even, I had played the opening quite accurately. My sense was I played the opening inaccurately. Yesterday I played the pawn to c4 like I just did in this game on move 6. And black was doing some shenanigans on the king side and ended up with a double pawns on the king side. And at the cost of exchanging off my f3 knight, one of the key defenders of my king. And because black had the double pawns on the king side, and then black proceeded to castle beneath that shattered pawn structure, I thought, gee, there's a lot of good incentives now to attack on the king side and not play on the queen side. The point of c4 is not only to put pressure on the c side, but potentially gain space on the queen side. But I decided after playing c4 that I was going to switch things up. I was going to change horses in the middle of the stream and start a collie-like attack on the king side. And by collie-like, I meant I moved my bishop to d3, I put my queen on c2, I put my knight on d2, and I attempted to play e4. But there was a problem, ladies and gentlemen. There was a problem, chess fans, that made me abort this plan well after I had already put it into motion, and could have, and probably should have, either cost me the game or resulted in nothing better than a draw. And the problem was black had the monster bishop fiend shadowed on g7, and the weakness was, look at it right here, my alleged strong point on d4. So if you move the e pawn, do you see the d pawn loses its support? You see that, everyone? Does everyone see that? Okay. Raise your hand if you don't see that if you move the e pawn, the d pawn it has less protection. The opening principles say you want to put a pawn in the center and then you want to support it. And that's precisely and exactly what the Max Murray opening does. The St. Louis attack, quote unquote, does. But once I've pushed this pawn, and that's what I had been planning to do in yesterday's game, this d pawn becomes significantly weaker, because it now has to be developed by pieces. And guess what? I didn't have an f3 knight. There was nothing, zero protecting my d pawn from the dark square bishop fiend shadowed on g7. And that meant I could not play safely e3, e4 without a massive amount of calculation and really ostensibly gambiting that pawn away. Maybe it was still playable. I don't know. The computer at this time thought my opening play was accurate, surprisingly. And I did find, I'm very proud to say, I did find some very difficult, accurate moves in the opening. At that time, I played my bishop to d2. And maybe in this game, we can talk a little bit about bishop on d2 versus bishop fiend shadowed on b2. And that was like not the obvious move in the position. There was 2 or 3 other candidate moves that looked more enticing and were flashier, but I needed to make the preparatory move, bishop d2 first. So I was quite proud that turned out to get a star in the chess.com review evaluation. What a beautiful feature that is for chess.com. I really enjoy chess.com. If you are on YouTube and you are not currently playing on chess.com or have a login there, please consider it. You can play at every level there. There's very low level bots if you want to play. You can play against people. One of the reasons why I don't play against people, and maybe at some point I will during the Max Murray Show here on YouTube, broadcasting to you from along the banks of the mighty Mississippi River in the Show Me State of Missouri. is I don't play people because they can think for a while and we'd be sitting here now. I'd be yakking, but I like the fact that the computer responds immediately to my moves. That means the only thing stopping the entertainment from going on is me yakking. Okay? And we still have quite a bit to talk about with this. This is a lot more nuanced than it looks, believe me. Believe you me. Okay, so let's then just get focused again. I am a positional player. I enjoy the segues and talking about position quite a bit. I believe that's where my chess understanding lies and where my strength as a chess player lies. But frankly, I must do more calculation. The final thing I wanted to say, though, was about this whole sequence of events regarding the pushing my e-pawn. If I'm going to push my e-pawn, then yes, I must play c3. That provides additional support to the d-pawn. If I'm going to push my e-pawn and I cannot support my b-pawn with the c-pawn because, for instance, the c-pawn has gone to c4 instead, like I played this game, then I need to be able to liquidate my d-pawn. In other words, black needs to have, say, a pawn on c5, and I play pawn takes pawn, and then he recaptures with whatever. Maybe his bishop takes pawn. And now I can play e4, and I don't have to worry about the potential weakness of my d-pawn having removed its e-pawn defender. All right, so that was my learning, and it really cemented my approach to developing my queen side. And I will play c3 now a lot more than I normally do and form the Illuminati triangle if I think I can liquidate the d-pawn when I need to, and if I think playing e4 is the correct key in the game. I've played the bots previously. e4, very strong when the king is still in the center. And you will notice, because black played queen e7 on move 5, that he blocked in his dark square. All these bots, the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, they're all playing these funky queen moves to e7. Black, I think, fixated on my b4 square. And which I've been weakening sometimes by my fiend shadowed plan A or plan B, putting my bishop on b2. But they block in their dark square bishops, and that means they can't castle. And sometimes they're pushing their queenside pawns, and that also compromises castling queenside. So their king, long story short, is stuck in the center, meaning if I push the e-pawn, if their exchange is in the center, even if it costs me a pawn, there's a payout at the end of it. Their king will be flapping in the breeze. Too vulnerable to a massive whirlwind attack straight up the center. For that reason, I would really, really want to play e4 in this type of game now that he's played queen e7 on move 5. But I can't against his Dutch. Now, he has played, or I won't against his Dutch, at least for now until I've studied it a little more. He has weakened his king side somewhat. Again, the Dutch suggesting that perhaps my prospects lie in a queenside attack. But, as every Russian schoolboy can tell you, you go in the direction your pawns point. My pawns are pointing at black's tender a7 square. Queenside expansion is almost always the preferable plan for the Max Murray opening pawn structure when e4 is not playable. I want to go this way. So whatever black is doing on the king side, kind of have to ignore. Now, you could say, well, what if black is playing a King's Indian attack involving, say, a fiend shadow of the king to bishop to 2 because they want to play an early e5 themselves, and then they want to shift their whole student body left to the king's side, and in classic King's Indian style, put my king under pressure. And I say, go for it. Because I've done nothing wrong on the king's side. I have a strong point in the center. My pieces are developed, and my king is safe in the corner. I have done nothing to provoke black to attack. If black attacks and I play precisely enough, then I should be able to not only ward off that attack, but injure and wound black in the process, especially if they decide to sacrifice, and win the game. Black, against the logic of black in chess is to get the draw. The advantage of white has of the first move is enough to suggest that black can never hope for more than a draw in chess with perfect play. There are openings, however, there are exceptions to that. For instance, if white plays e2, e4, best by test according to Bobby Fischer, and black responds with a Sicilian defense, c5, well, that's against the entire logic of the game because black is attempting to create an imbalance right from the first move and win. That's not what my opening is about. If black wants to try to win and contort himself and twist himself like a pretzel to get some sort of attack going against my very solid position, and all the time and energy and effort that he takes to do that, I will be expanding on the queen side. And I won a beautiful game on an OTB tournament this year doing exactly that. Black would attack. I'd wait until there was no threats, and then I'd make a move on the queen side. Black would continue attacking. I'd continue to thwart it off until black had no threats, and then I'd make another move on the queen side. And this ratcheting process continued until the pressure on my queen side started to build. Black began to have doubts whether the attack was actually going anywhere, but by that time it was too late. And at the point when black's attack finally and ultimately fizzled out on the king side against my strong defensive posture, it was far too late for them on the queen side. I broke through on the queen side, and it was over on the 7th rank. The game ended suddenly and violently for my opponent with the black pieces. And what had I played? Well, the Max Murray opening. And what had black done? Attacked the Max Murray opening. And what had happened to black? It was futile. Anyway, all right. So now finally, this is why these games take 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 55 seconds. That's 182 minutes and 55 seconds for those who are doing the math at home. And it's because I'm gabbing, and I'm not even looking really at the concrete issues. Now, let's take kind of a survey of where we stand. Black has played the Dutch defense, famously weakening the diagonal that runs from the e8 square to the h5 square, number one, but it is considered aggressive. And it is imbalancing. And perhaps the biggest point of it is the control black gets over the e4 square. However, unfortunately for black, I've never really intended to play e4, so I don't feel like I'm losing out on anything when black puts a pawn on f5. Quite the contrary. I think he's wasted time. Hang on. I gotta sneeze again. There is some pollen here in the state of Missouri, the Show Me State. So, key feature number one of the black position, this pawn on f5. Now, pawn created a triangle by playing pawns to d5, e6, and f5. And that triangle is actually quite strong, very solid. He just broke up the triangle, however, by playing d takes c. And he is also, and this is important and perhaps the central feature of his current setup, is he has brought his queen to e7, blocking his dark squared bishop. By playing c takes d, I don't know what he hopes to accomplish. I will move my bishop for a second time. Tempi really doesn't matter too much in this opening because our two forces are not in contact. When I do capture the pawn on c4, most likely with my bishop, we'll talk about that in a minute, I am targeting a backwards pawn on e6. He has created a potential weakness when he created the triangle, a weakness I really couldn't get at even with moves like knight g5, because the knight can be easily booted. He's created this weakness. I can attack. The other real problem that's going to happen to him, a slow motion car accident perhaps, is in the Max Murray opening. If white can ever play d4, d5, it almost always results in a advantage. Not a sliver advantage, which we normally only can expect with this opening system. An outright advantage. Maybe still a small a, maybe not capital A. It's not a winning advantage. But if I can get d5 in, I have found that discombobulates black enough that white is ahead. Now, I'm down material a pawn right now. Black has 8 pawns and I have 7. Well, that's not fair. So I need to restore material equality. I can capture the pawn immediately. But notice, as I've already mentioned, that black cannot defend that pawn. Therefore, I don't have to play bishop takes c4 right away. I could delay it if I want to get fancy pants. Other anecdotes against this pawn is if my knight were on b, I could move to the a3 square and recapture with the knight. I've looked at this many times, and sometimes the computer likes the maneuver and prefers it. However, I've never really greatly understood the benefit of a knight on c4. However, in this case though, there is obviously an immediate and direct benefit of a knight on c4, and that is this hole black has on the e5 square, which is supported by a pawn. If you can get a pawn in the center, that's good. If you can get a pawn in the center and support it, that's even better. But the best thing, what you would really want, is a piece posted up in the center, supported by a pawn and unassailable. If that's the case, you have virtually a winning advantage. However, I've already moved. The sad thing is I've already moved my knight to the c3 square. The e5 square for my knight c3 is a distant dream, because the knight will take literally 3 moves according to the geometry of chess to get itself to the e5 square. Now, I could potentially start such a long and arduous journey for that knight, try to calculate it through, and I may have time because the two sides here are not in contact and there is no emergent problems. Notice also black has hemmed in his light squared bishop fairly badly. The other point though is my f3 knight does in fact and can drop in to the e5 square. I don't want to do that necessarily right away. 1, because black can exchange knight for knight, and 2, because my f3 knight is a key defender of the king side, and because black has played the Dutch, I am a little wary that black may attempt a kingside attack, at which point I will definitely need to lean on the stalwart broad shoulders of my knight f3, the key defender of the king side. It, for instance, supports the very often attacked h2 pawn. Should black have positioned his bishop where it probably was better on e6 and more classical kind of development. So I do have control over this square. He cannot play e5 effectively, at least not right now, and that means this bishop cannot effectively develop to its natural and first choice opening diagonal, running from c8 to all the way down to my h3 square. That might mean he needs to fianchetto the bishop to bring it to the long light square diagonal. I have antidotes to that. I call it the pinwheel, where I will move this knight and pinwheel my bishop up to f3, and that will neutralize the light squared bishop. And by exchanging off those light squared bishops, I have at the same time increased the protection of my king. Since the main avenue directly into my position is this long light square diagonal pointing directly at the king in front of the king on the g2 square. Another method for recovering this pawn is to play knight to a4, and that's what I'm going to have to look at now. There are some downsides to this move. One is, in the Max Murray opening, I have found the safest and most solid approach is instead to put the knight, say, on c2. I think that's the natural square for her to connect the rooks, where she provides defense along the second rank to these pawns. And in yesterday's game, when I made such a maneuver, I mentioned that the queen provides lateral protection to my second rank, and then joked that you're probably poo-pooing and laughing about that because look at all this traffic and everything is protected, or there's so much traffic going on. Like, what possible difference can the queen make? But when these pieces come off and pawns start to move and everyone ventures away and leaves the nest, there can be attacks here, and if I have to move pawns, the queen fills the vacuum beneath. So the point is putting the queen on a4 is moving pretty far from my king. About as far away as you can get. Except my king, maybe on h1 would be further. Advantage is the queen is now staring quite purposefully at black's king on e8, which he is very embarrassed because he cannot castle away to safety. He can't run. The king a coward in the opening. The other point is additional control on the b5 square, preventing black from putting a pawn there. And then finally, queen takes c4 would be the finale of developing a queen to the a4 square, or at least the option of taking the pawn with the queen is where she could be outposted on an important attacking square. All this said, okay, all of this talked about, I could also, I suppose, do something wild like play a4 and really bite down and just wait, sit on this pawn. But I do not want to weaken my dark square. I do not want to do that. What I found, though, in terms of actual praxis, is I want to capture this pawn right away with my bishop, because I can't calculate. So yeah, I can put the queen on a4. That's the aggressive square. That's what the attacking chess players do. That's what the kids are doing. That's all the rage with the kids nowadays. Okay. But I don't see the value of that. Also, black will develop perhaps the bishop to d7, opposing my queen on the a4 square. And now black's bishop is actually doing something. However, that will provoke the bishop away from the long light square diagonal, which means I might not have to do the pinwheel or some other anti-Fianchetto bishop protocol. And that's kind of a win for me. But this is a bit of an excursion. I'm going to play in my normal style. I'm going to capture the pawn. Now, black has won a tempo in the sense that I've already moved my bishop to e2. And I'm going to have to move it a second time in the opening in violation of chess principles. There's time, though, is not of the essence here. And there's something else that is critical potentially here, and that is I'm strengthening my pawn break d4, d5, because now I'll have the bishop supporting that pawn break, I'll have the knight supporting the pawn break to d5, and I'll have the queen behind the pawn supporting the pawn break. I can also bring the queen potentially to b3, strengthening the attack along the light square diagonal here, running from a2 to g8, and bring the rook over and add even more pressure to the d file, opening the d file, and now the king has a window open right next to him. A cliff, in essence, has opened up along the d file if it opens, and he is standing at a precipice looking into a howling abyss of the open d file with everything to play for, all four of the minor pieces on the board. By the way, that is another advantage of the Max Murray opening. It generally keeps all the pawns and all the pieces on the board. Meaning, okay, you don't get a big advantage out of the opening, but you have all your tools available to outplay your opponent in the middle game. And if you are higher rated, regardless of the fact whether black equalizes or not, if you are higher rated and confident in your abilities, you will have the opportunity to outplay your opponent. Some openings where a lot of pawns and pieces are exchanged off, there's less material to work with in that regard. A lot of gabbing here. A lot of gabbing. I want to think for it. I want to do something else. I want to take a moment and think about it a little more deeply. If I bring the queen out, I don't have a lot of experience in these positions. I do like this pin. Most likely, we're going to go through move by move now. Most likely, black will respond by breaking the pin against the knight and putting the bishop on d7. That will also enable queenside castling for him. He almost certainly won't queenside castle. None of these bots have against me. And he will be queenside castling right into the teeth of my attack because that's where my pawns point. So it'll be bishop a4, I'm sorry, queen a4, bishop d7, queen takes pawn for dinosaur speak. My queen on a unusual square. Black still cannot harry the queen and has no d-pawn to harry the queen either. She is in the sights of this knight that could force her back to d3. On the d4 square, she's also blocking my light squared bishop from the b5 square, which could become important. That is also another pinning square. If black is harrying my knight though with my queen with a knight on a5, the second jump for that knight, it's an accelerator move because it comes with a threat, and I have to respond by moving my queen away. Now the knight can move a second time. The accelerator threat, though, is not particularly apparent. I've got the b3 square, the main jump-off point for that knight, covered. This feels wrong. I bet the computer would evaluate queen to a4 as not the first choice. Now let's look at bishop takes pawn, the safe move. My bishop staring directly at the e6 weakness. That's good. The queen now can develop herself to e2 as a choice. That's also good. I would prefer her probably on c2, especially since black can't oppose with a light squared bishop. But if the queen on c2 is vulnerable to this knight to b4 nonsense, which justifies a lot of black's play against the dark squares on my queen side, my queen on c2 will be threatened. Queen on e2 will be away from dark squared threats on the queen side, and will help connect my rook. It's an open question about where my c bishop here, my dark squared bishop, will develop. Because this pawn will be gone, I could continue with my development along the long dark squared diagonal. That would increase my death clamp on the e5 square, because now it would be a d-pawn strong point controlling that square, the knight f3, a defender of the king controlling that square, multitasking, and my bishop all focused on this square. Now I could think about occupying it. Here, my queen on e2 not only is safe, but I can bring the rook over. I still have to develop this dark squared bishop. It's going to be a situation. I think I like the idea of taking with the bishop, probably developing the queen to e2, where the predations of this knight are of no consequence. Then developing my dark squared bishop, probably after playing b3 and fianchetto by fianchetto. Then putting both my rooks on the prospective files that are going to open up, namely on the C1 and D1 squares, then either occupying the E5 square hole or pushing forward with D5. Also, my bishop here on this long light square diagonal would really make the king hesitant to request his pieces untangle themselves and castle kingside. If he castles at all, or she, Julia, rated 1800, the chess bot's the last of the three before we get to the 1900s, and then things are going to get real. I will go from teaching the chess lessons to becoming the chess lesson. My play so far, though, has been above 2,000, 2150 yesterday, and defeating a bot that played 200 rating points above its weight, punching above its weight. So the 19s I still should be able to dispatch, but when we get to the 2000, that's probably when things get real, okay? All right, we're going to play here. Enough of this to-doing. We're not going to go with this rather wandering queen idea. I'm curious now to see the computer evaluation after this game, which unfortunately I don't share with you. Maybe at some point I'll figure out how to get that on my OBS, and we can evaluate a game together using the chess engine. That will be certainly interesting, because then you don't have to rely on me telling you what the best moves are, because what do I know? We can see it from the chess engine. The black has, yes indeed, developed the bishop to d7. However, it is not pointing at my queen, because I've decided not to move my queen to the a4 square. We can immediately look to this. Do we break in the center immediately right now? The side that has the pawn breaks has the initiative. The side that has the most critical pawn break is in the driver's seat in any chess position. That's not an absolute, of course. There are exceptions in chess, and then there are exceptions to the exceptions. And then if that doesn't twist and break your mind, there are exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions in chess. It's not an easy game. Let's look. This is a concrete move, and we have to look at it in a concrete way. First thing, it's a fork. We are attacking the knight on c6, which came out on move 4 and blocked his c-pawn. I don't like this. I see this a lot. It's kind of like a Shigorin knight coming out and blocking its c-pawn. Yes, and I did experience some problems in the lower rated bots. There was some devastation involved when I underestimated and poo-pooed this c6 knight, because I am a classical player and you don't block your pawns with your pieces. Philidor said, you advance your pawns, then you develop your pieces behind them. That is the classic chess mindset. But the deal is, moving the knight and blocking the c-pawn is still a developmental move. Putting the knight on the c6 square cannot be wrong because it is a developmental move. Now, it may have significant pluses and minuses, but it can't be wrong unless there's a direct tactical refutation, which in the opening is almost never the case. It can't be wrong. It's a developing move. May not be the best move, but it can't be wrong. And I can't just think, oh, my opponent has blocked his c-pawn. Wow, I have a huge advantage now. The game's going to win itself. I'll just go ahead and go make another cup of coffee, and my pieces will magically move to the best squares and we'll win. You can't do that. I've got to demonstrate why blocking this c-pawn is a problem for black. And the first exhibit A in that prosecution is this pawn fork. because now black either moves the knight away and gives me the opportunity to make an exchange on the e-file with the pawns, or black is forced to make the exchange himself to save the knight from the pawn. But I have let's count them, 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking that d5 square. Black has, let's count them, 1, 2 pieces defending. I outnumber black. Sometimes chess is a democracy and you count noses. The player who controls the square has more pieces and pawns attacking that square. We could have wholesale exchanges now on e5, and me, Max Murray, your host of the Max Murray Show, will end up with either, in this case, with a piece on that d pawn. Which piece we don't know exactly yet. We have to do further calculation. So let's take a look. Now, one other thing before I do the calculation, and it's important to understand in the context of the Max Murray opening. I have not completed my development. And one of my personal chess maxims is do not seek complications until your development is complete. That's how you lose. I lost an important over-the-board tournament game playing my system confidently because I got distracted by shiny objects before I'd completed my development. Didn't finish putting my queen side into play and losing. I played a strong opponent, and that was if you don't get your pieces off the back rank, you can and will lose against a strong opponent. That is an argument against playing d5 right now, even if I get some temporary advantage, and I'm pretty sure I will. Even if I open the center with the king flapping in the breeze. If I cannot follow up with my pieces because they're on bad squares, they haven't got off the back rank, they're not in the game, they're sitting on the bench still, they're not in the game. Any positional advantage I get will be lost like tears in the rain, in the sands of time, to quote Blade Runner, because I will get my advantage, then I'll scramble to try to follow up. It'll take me time, and in that time, black will put a band-aid on the problem, complete his development, get his king to safety, and it all comes to naught. It all fizzles. There's a big flash bang, but it all fizzles because I can't follow up. One issue is I don't want to lead with my chin. I don't want to end up with my queen on this square necessarily. Just simply bishop e6 would thwart my queen. So we're going to do a calculation anyway because we've got to look at it. There is a nice little queen attack because she has made herself available on the e7 square to harassment by my c3 knight via the d5 square, which is the object of our discussion right now. And look, there is a tender weak spot left behind by the queen, and that is the c7 pawn. So let's look at it. Pawn takes pawn. If I take knight, pawn, now I'm creating another threat. Take the queen, take the pawn, and even trade off the knight. Let's assume black decides not to lose time by, say, moving the queen back to the d square, which they have to justify the fact that they put their queen on the e7 square. In human terms, the computer, of course, doesn't feel the compunction at all. Julia, the 1800 rated bot on chess.com, doesn't feel any compunction at all about justifying this move. A human being would, though, definitely. They would be loath to undevelop the queen back to the d8 square and admit they made a mistake. But anyway, d5, pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight to protect that c pawn. Now bishop takes pawn. That's the end of the exchanges, and it ends up with my light squared bishop on d5. Posted in the center. Remember, a piece in the center is ideal, or near ideal. It's as close to nirvana as you can get. However, it is a bishop. Bishops do not like their ranged pieces. They don't like to be in the action where they can be harried, and they don't need to be in the mix. Not like knights. Knights need to be in the mix. Can black dislodge this bishop? Well, one problem again is I'm leading with my chin, which is the queen. The bishop that settles on d5 is not under direct threat, but black could, let's just say right there and then, no more further ado, black castles queenside. Now black has placed a rook opposite my queen. My queen on the d1 square, the black rook after castling queenside on the d8 square, eyeballing my queen. There is two bishops between my queen and the rook, but that situation could quickly be resolved by, let's say black puts the bishop on e6, threatening mine. I will have a move. I will have opportunity to respond to that, and I could possibly, by playing my queen to b3 at that point, defending the rook, that's the bishop, that's on d5. However, this diagonal now leading to nothing after the king has castled. This bishop's still a problem. I've blocked in my b pawn from moving because my queen is on b3. That means the bishop, my dark squared bishop has to go to d2 most likely. It's blocked from further development on that diagonal by my own e3 pawn, defending my strong point. Therefore, I can't connect the rooks. They can't support each other. It'd be very dangerous of me to challenge the d file with an unsupported rook. Although it is supported by the queen, it gets a little kludgy. My position becomes a little kludgy. Yes, I am proud and happy to show you my bishop on the d5 square after these exchanges. However, it's all held together with gum and paper clips. I don't see why I can't necessarily wait. Black will castle queenside next move, probably. Now the rook is supporting activity down the d file, but I can continue by putting my grip here, complete my development, connect my rooks. Now we can have a fight on the d file, and I can engage properly with my rooks, which are connected. So this feels it undoubtedly the computer, which always is, the computers are flat concrete. I don't think computers give a flying flip about positional considerations. It's all 100% brute force calculation. Modern chess, in a word, 2 words. 3 words. Brute force calculation. That is modern chess. Brute force calculation. Do I move my queen right now to e2? Or do I commit my bishop to a square? If I'm going to commit my bishop, I can move it right now to d2, putting me slightly out of contact with my strong point. Black has a break here, potentially. Black does have a break here. And black may want to try to undermine my pawn structure, suggesting my f rook should stay in place for the time being, because if black plays f4 and exchanges on e3, I recapture my own f pawn, and my rook is now by default on an open file without having moved from its castle position on f1. If I play b3, I have prevented my bishop from retreating to b3. So my bishop could be kicked off of this long diagonal. I don't think this diagonal a2 to g8 is of significant consequence because black is not threatening, quote unquote, to castle kingside because he has not developed his dark squared bishop, and black still has to untangle that whole mess. Black could be coming with an onslaught with g7, g5 doesn't necessarily work for him right away because I'll take it with the knight. And adding pressure to this. If black castles queenside, then slow play really benefits me because any space I gain on the queen side not only cramps black but has the potential to threaten the king directly on the queen side. And I want to play in the direction my pawns are pointing. That's how the Max Murray system wants to be played. Is there any argument for the bishop on d2? A question I've been asking myself from a theoretical standpoint for the Max Murray opening for quite some time. When I look at my previous games, and I've had hundreds, there are times when the bishop should come to d2 and not come to the long dark square diagonal. But those are when black has done something wrong that is refutable by positioning the dark squared bishop on the classical Indian square of d2. I'm a little paralyzed here for thought. This is going to be another slobber knocker in the 2 to 3 hour level. I have to again make a decision. Notice there is, because black played bishop d7, we should pay attention to how does the position change with every move, because that's really the heart of chess. Chess occurs in the present moment. As much as we look into the crystal ball as chess players and try to divine the future, chess is actually still played in the present moment. That we have to make a move at that moment. You have to move. That's the rules of chess. You can't pass. By moving the bishop to d7, the pawn here on b7 has lost its defender. He will defend it most likely next turn with a triple O. But I can get an accelerator move with my queen to b3. It's kind of a square my queen wants to be on. For reasons I talked before, my queen wants off the d file now. Not just to connect my rooks so they can support each other so they can move into the enemy position and cause mayhem, but because she's going to be bullied down the d file. So, let's look at queen b3. Often the computer likes queen b3 style moves, and it contains a threat, and that's really the heart of chess. We want to make moves that have threats. Why? That's always a good question, right? Why do you make moves that have threats? Because then black or your opponent has to respond to that threat. Usually there's only a very narrow menu of choices of how to respond to that threat. The more restricted your opponent has in their options of the moves, the better. They are worried about defending. You are worried about burning their house down. It's easier to burn their house down than it is to defend. Queen on b3 forms a battery with the light squared bishop against the backwards weak pawn on e6. But white can also defend this b pawn and make an aggressive counterattack with knight to b5. Now forking my light squared bishop and my queen on b3, and but wait, there's more, defending the b7 pawn. Do we all see that? Chess fans, do you all see that? Get out your notebooks, write it down, double underline. The knight would be really doing some work on the side of the board. Knight on the rim is dim, knight on the rim is grim, unless it's there for a specific purpose. And this knight would have three specific purpose for being there. So I think as attractive as this move appears, it's not in the cards for me. I don't want to justify this, also opening up the light squared bishop. I'm inclined now to consider bishop to e2. Getting out of the watchful eye of this dark knight in an absolute sense, because I intend to maintain this strong point on d5 indefinitely. The knight, I would tend not to give the knight the option of getting there. Even if I have to exchange the pawn at some point, I will maintain a pawn on e3. Even if that pawn is exchanged, I'll still maintain a pawn on e3 to keep the black knight out of my d4 square. So instead of just gabbing endlessly, I don't know, you're probably snoozing at the keyboard now if you're even watching this, and we will move the queen to e2. Is this the best move in this situation? Probably not. Next thing, I'll have to decide what to do with my bishop. There's castle triple O. We expected it. I'm going to take my time now and complete my development. The move e4, e5, the break, still on the table. Very much so. But less exigent because the king is now safer. Black has to resolve certain issues, like how does Julia the Bot 1800 connect her rooks. That is still an open problem for black, and it's going to take time for black to solve that. One idea for black possibly is to put a pawn on g6, develop the dark squared bishop to h6, and then attack with a pawn break my e3 pawn. Now, if that does in fact become black's plan, it may be more beneficial for me to have my dark squared bishop on d2 developed so that I am overprotecting my e3 square. On the other hand, if black decides to develop his dark squared bishop by fianchetto instead of getting his queen out of the way, then there is really a very good strong argument for putting my bishop on the long dark squared diagonal, and I think that's what I'm going to do because that's usually the right move. And overthinking this move is rarely the right move. It's rare. It does happen. I can kind of safely play b3 because even if the knight comes to b4, it is doing nothing. In my camp, there's no targets. And I can kick it with a3 and then play from b3 to b4. And we can really get things rolling on the queen side. So that's the plan. But I am gonna put my bishop on the long. A bishop that's fianchettoed. We talked about this yesterday. I talked about this at length. A bishop that's fianchettoed. In other words, bishop b2. So b3, bishop b2. A bishop that's fianchettoed on the long diagonal is done for the center. That is why you fianchetto bishop, because you intend to fight for the center. A bishop that develops more classically to d2 is no longer aimed at the center at all. You notice that? But is working on the flanks. So you develop you fianchetto a bishop when you're going after the center. We see that like in the Grunfeld defense where black fianchettos his dark squared bishop to the g7 square and then immediately attempts to break up the center using that bishop as a support. I believe, though, the bishop is still supporting my flank on the b2 square, because yes, it is on the long diagonal, and we can get fixated on that. Yep. See, bishop b2 Finchetto's on the long diagonal. But look, let's not forget this little detail here, that the bishop is also looking at the a3 square, and I do want to put a pawn there. I could try this immediately. This is not a normal play for me. I haven't really done this before. But I put a pawn right now. Let's say I put a pawn right now on a3. A very calm, very slow move. Now the knight loses a lot of its future potential. The bishop has an escape hatch on a2, so I can keep surveying his backward pawn. And perhaps most importantly of all, I am preparing to move b2, b4, follow up with b5, kicking the knight, and then continuing an assault against the pawn shield in front of the king on the queen side. And this kind of, I've heard this position was like a super Finchetto, right? Because I have the pawn on a3 and b4, and then when I go to b2 eventually with the bishop, it's a super Finchetto. So let's do that. I don't know if it's the correct move. I want to play slowly here. I believe the positional trumps are in my favor. Black does have pawn breaks. I haven't calculated them too much. I'm relying on just the fact that I have resources that any break right now can be dealt with. And I think it'd be a mistake for Black to break right now without having completed his development, by connecting his rooks and getting his dark squared bishop on a more active square than f8, where it is hemmed in by his own forces. I think it would be a mistake for Black to break right now. And it kind of just like I think d5 was not the best time for me to break either, because I hadn't completed my development. It was too risky. I believe I can get an advantage in this position simply by completing my development. Okay. The point, though, that I wanted to make regarding this whole conversation I just had about these pawn breaks is I may want to put my rook right now on the d1 square and not waste any more time with it. However, like I said, the rook, because Black has a prominent, very prominent pawn break on f4 that could become the plan for Black, I may want to just keep this rook on f1 also, and it will enter the game de facto without me having touched it other than castling. When Black breaks on f4 and captures on my e3 square. So we will play a waiting move. Let's see what Black does. Here comes the attack on the bishop. Now I have given myself options. Remember, options are the sweet fruits of chess. The more options you have, the better, because options lead to good squares. No options forces you to put stuff on bad squares. The bishop has been asked a question here. Which diagonal do you want to go to? You can't have both. You can't be on this f1 to a6, and you can't remain on at the same time as the a2 to g8. You got to choose one or the other. You can go back to d3 if you want. It's in the center, but I'm not going to play this break e4. I probably shouldn't just say I'm never going to break that, but it's unlikely that I'm going to play this break to e4 and go suddenly to a Kali style. My intention is to continue to play where my pawns are directed and maintain this fortress in the center. So d3, unlikely. Knight has not come to e4 yet, which is a little surprising because that seemed to be the point of Black's opening play, was to move the knight from f6 to e4. I can exchange it off But then if he takes with the pawn, he's now doubled. I don't believe what he did here, this DC, I think was a strategic blunder. It created this weakness. It made this hole a lot more pertinent. I believe I want to continue surveying this pawn. I can come here and offer an exchange. The knight goes back, probably, or even he can just play something like this. Because the light squared bishops are off, he can weaken his light squares. I don't think I want to offer an exchange. I could play there again. Let's say he exchanges it. My knight can come here. Now I'm threatening to take the a7 pawn with check. Suppose he just tries to kick my knight, and then what? Nothing. I don't think I accomplish anything with this, and nor is it the time really for me to be exchanging pieces, because black is a little cramped underneath his e6 pawn, and he has not solved his problems. And I don't want to make life easier on him by giving him squares like his queen. He could exchange, maybe kick the knight, bring the queen to the d file or something, and then so this is, we're going to go back to a2. A little disadvantage of that is we take our eye off of a3 with our rook, something I was kind of banking on a little bit, but that's not a problem so far with our bishop covering it, and the fact that b4 is going to shield it completely on the dark squares, and I have control over the c5 square, so there's no c break. He may want to play a c break. See now how he's moved his knight out of the way? That's something we should pay attention to. And what is the geometry of each move? What does it allow? It has vacated the square for, it's vacated the diagonal for the white light squared bishop. He could come here with the idea of exchanging off my knight. My queen, though, on e2 is the backup defense for that knight. Also the knight protected by the g-pawn. That would open my king, but sometimes when that happens, if there's a exchange of bishop for knight on f6 and I recapture with my g-pawn and I move my king to h1, sometimes I can get to that open file faster and more efficiently than black. Also, if I have my light square bishop on that side of the board, and it usually is because it's on e2, if I can get a bishop on g2 and a king on h1, that's surprisingly a secure defensive formation. Anyway, back to a2 with the idea of b4. Okay, now he's driven my bishop away. Now he's moved the knight back to c6, once again blocking the c pawn and the egress of his light squared bishop along the a4 e8 diagonal. Now I think I want to continue with b4 and then look to see what I want to do with my bishop. So here is the super fianchetto. I think black is simply helping me. Black has now played a5, the first indication perhaps that he has a problem on the queen side. Now, I was concerned that the bishop was cutting off the rook's defense of a3, and at the time I said it looked a little funny because there was no pressure there, right? And I said also that this b pawn would block up the diagonal. But notice how the bishop is now doing that job, meaning I can and probably will play b4, b5. If black tries to win a pawn with his queen, I'll just take it off. He is leading with his chin. This is a battery, but the problem for black is, Julia, 1800 rated bot, you're leading with your chin with this battery. Okay, you're leading with your most valuable piece. You want the queen behind the bishop, unless, of course, you are attacking my h2 pawn. Then the queen taking the pawn and leading with your chin would be very, very salutary for you. I could also take it. Black would recapture, again, now somewhat freeing his position because the knight is here, but coming at the horrendous cost of opening the b file. Once again, the king is standing on the edge of a precipice, a half-open b file. Might try to play something like b6 to blunt that half-open b file, but then these light squares become weak. He does have a light squared bishop around his king. If I play b5, it comes with tempo. The knight, not a lot of good squares to go to. So b5 sidestepping this. If he tries to defend it with c6, b6, I'm sorry. If he tries to defend this pawn and form a little pawn chain of his own on the dark squares here on the queen side, I do not have a c pawn to break, but I do have a backward pawn on c6 along my half-open file, and that is target enough, maybe. Also, the potential for exchanges. Also, he's weakened this light square. If he touches this b pawn. By moving here, I am defending it with the queen and the knight, suggesting that I have made the correct decision, putting my queen on e2 rather than c2. I still have to finish my opening. We are on move 12. We're 12 moves in. The opening is not yet complete because I've not connected my rooks, which is the textbook Russian schoolboy textbook definition of the end of the opening is when the rooks are connected. Just like the textbook definition of an endgame is when the queens are off. Of course, there are such things as queenless middle games, but I talked about chess having exceptions to the exceptions, and then exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions. This is the move that wants to be played. He moved knight to a7, logical. Two minor pieces ganging up now on the b pawn. It is defended twice, so I'm not in any immediate danger of losing the pawn. He also has some pressure against the a3 pawn, so if I were deciding to move my bishop to d2, perhaps to target a5, this pawn could drop off. It dropping off by itself, not a bad thing. He would lose his queen doing that, but suppose he were able to get at some other conventional way, some other convention was used to get this a3 pawn off without losing the queen. I do have this pressure here. One thing I want to look at some point is, can I increase pressure on this backwards pawn? Does opening the center favor him or I when he plays this pawn break e5, if he can? And that is an open question, but right now he can't play it, and I want to keep it that way. Note with the knight gone from c7, now the hole here on e5 is quite juicy for my knight because there's nothing challenging the knight on the e5 square, and with the knight vacated from the long light square diagonal, I can pinwheel not my light squared bishop, but my queen, the actual queen, pinwheel it to f3. Pinwheel is my own Max Murray verbiage, my own language. And now I am really putting pressure on the queen side. It's slow, but I kind of want to play a3 to a4. That will fix this potential weakness. If black ever decides to defend pawn with pawn, then the c pawn becomes backwards and defended only by the king. A very precarious situation for the black king at that point. Black may end up at some point having to scoot the king over to the b file and relocate the rook to the back to the c file, and then that's kind of a funny turn of events. Castling queenside, meaning all your stuff is shifted one square closer to the center, and then shuffling everything over is rather ironic, I would say, when you can do the same thing by castling queenside. But black, Julia, you played queen e7. Don't blame me for this. Do not blame me for this situation, Julia. you already decided when you moved your queen to e7 that you were going to make castling kingside highly problematic for yourself. Oh, there is something I want to pay attention to. I didn't in one of my more recent games against the computer bots, and it was the genesis of an outright blunder. I lost a pawn because I wasn't paying attention to queen on queen action. We are facing each other off along the e-file. Yes, there are pawns between us. You'd be surprised how quickly things can change on a chessboard. If those pawns were to come off, I am defended. My queen is defended by the knight on c3. His queen, of course, very well defended. Overly defended, I would say, by the bishop on f8. That is the bishop's really only job right now. Point is, black couldn't try shenanigans like, say, rook takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, queen takes queen, because I could recapture, right? So a sacrifice on my strong point d4 would not work. My blunder was I had the queen on c2 at the time. He had a queen on my opponent, my chess bot had a queen, I believe it was on the c6 square. There were pawns in between, but then when black sacrificed on my d4 strong point, I could not recapture with the pawn because my queen was unprotected on the c2 square. That is a big sort of difference in developing the queen either to e2 or c2 in the Max Murray chess opening. The queen on c2 not only is vulnerable to a bishop sometimes coming to the f5 square sometimes, but she's undefended by any piece until you back her up with a rook on the c-file. By moving to e2, she is going to remain under the watchful protection of my knight on c3, since that is the natural development square, and plan A for getting my queen side into the game is to get a knight on c3. So I'm going to put that into my mental book. Now, the thing is, this knight is going to want to move at some point. It is itself undefended. Sometimes that's a problem when black has fianchettoed the dark squared bishop, which black has not done, but may do very shortly. And it can be the object of an attack. In fact, that could happen immediately should I play a3, a4, for instance, by queen to b4. So is queen to b4 a threat because it is attacking two undefended pieces? It's attacking a pawn if you on a4 undefended, except by the knight, which it is also attacking. So it's kind of a double. It's kind of a sneaky double attack. My queen providing support along the second rank. I told you, I keep telling you, chess fans, the queen staying close to home on the second rank is a very valuable resource, and it is surprising how important this second rank becomes. Because suppose I play a4 and the queen plays b4, I can, if I really wanted to, develop my bishop to b2, and it is guarded by the queen. I do definitely want to cover this pawn quickly because that light square diagonal could become tender with my rook still on f1, which I want to keep there due to this potential break opening the position. This break being, of course, f4 and f takes e. I believe I can go here. This can't possibly be anything for black. It really can't. I can also, well, I'd have to move here, wouldn't I? I was going to say I could put my bishop on d2 to thwart that, but now queen takes pawn. Then bishop takes pawn. I've connected my rooks. The queen has to move away, and then maybe this can't tactically work. I have too much material. We're gonna play this then. Let's see if queen b4 comes. No. No, it doesn't. And white has finally occupied the e4 square, a tender spot in the Max Murray opening system, also known as the Yusupov-Rubinstein and sometimes mislabeled as the Colley by the computer. The e4 square is a tender spot. By playing knight f6, of course, right in the opening on the second move, or sometimes the first move, she started with the f5 pawn, the Dutch. But by moving knight to f6, and even the first move, f5 is denying white the opportunity to move to e4 with the e-pawn. So, yes, I open with the d, but black says you can get the center with the d-pawn, that's fine, but I'm not going to allow you to get the classical pawn duo in the center because I, myself, as black, will control your e4 square, and you can't put a pawn there. That's what at knight f6 is all about, and even more poignantly, what f5 is all about. But I could just take here, okay? Anyone? Does anyone see the problem with me just taking this? Because the knight is defended only by a pawn. It's going to double. He can liquidate the double pawns eventually by playing e5. But what's going to happen is I'm going to play knight takes knight. He's going to play pawn takes knight. Now I got to do something with my f3 knight because it's under attack by a pawn. But I've played hundreds of games, and my knight can and often does come back to the d2 square, which does not take a square from the dark squared bishop per se, because I have an alternate and maybe more favorable square on b2. And then I'm threatening to take this knight. So how is he going to cover that? I mean, this pawn. So if I play knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, knight to d2, how is he going to defend this pawn? Well, I guess he has to play queen h4. Not necessarily a bad move, because he is eyeing my tender spot on h2. He's defending the pawn, and he's preparing to play bishop to d6, connecting his rooks and increasing the attacking pressure against h2, which is no longer defended by my knight, probably forcing g3, probably. And now we're getting to sort of the misty future, weakening my light squares, and my light squared bishop is on the wrong side of the board. It has made a rather long journey from the e2 square, where it developed on move 4 in the Max Murray opening system. Remember, it is d4, knight to f6, e3, bishop e2, move 4, and then double O. The light squared bishop has come to rest, however, for the time being, because it got greedy for this e6 pawn, and it got there via the c takes d or d takes c break. I do have a tactical nuance here before we get further in, because I'm not in any way, shape, or form compelled to capture this knight right now, other than the fact that I have to do something with my knight, because remember I said it was loose, and that can be a tactical issue. Whether or not this leads to a positional advantage for black, and I don't believe it does, or an attack even, which might be what's coming. And notice the f file will be open also after pawn, knight takes knight, pawn takes knight. So, this knight being loose is a problem, and I did not quite get my bishop to defend it. If you're a lower rated player, I'd like to advise you for a moment of the words of Andrea Botez, an entertaining YouTuber and streamer of chess, a chess celebrity personality, so to speak. She said that if you're a beginner and you're playing low-rated and you're playing other low-rated, you lose games by dropping your pieces. You know that, I know that, everyone knows that. So the way to avoid losing games as a beginner is to defend your pieces. As you advance in rating, it becomes do as I say, not as I do, and you will see a lot of players moving pieces to undefended squares. However, if you're lower rated, it behooves one to defend all your pieces. And if you do have a piece that is not defended, then the next move should be to defend it. Suggesting the beginner move, according to Andrea Botes, would be either bishop d2 or bishop b2 defending my knight. Not moving it away or not exchanging it necessarily, although knight takes knight is probably my best choice here. But defending it. Something about the long square diagonal, I don't know if I mentioned this, because I am considering at the moment now bishop b2, is this d-pawn has nobody in front of it. And at the beginning of this discussion, I talked about this d-pawn in the Max Murray system and its mobility issues. And because there's nothing in front of this pawn right now, I can always evacuate the long dark square diagonal when it is tactically advantageous to do so and unleash the beast of my dark square bishop on the b2 square. That's important, because if black had maintained the pawn on d, I can't open up the long squared dark diagonal. All right. If I play knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, he does gain a tempo against this knight, like I said. Probably guards the pawn with the queen. And the idea of moving bishop e6, which is a little scary, to be honest with you. I've lost my major defense on the king side. So what would be the follow-up? Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, knight here attacking the pawn, queen. Can I put more pressure here? Do I want the queens off? I really don't have the option. I could drop the bishop, as odd as it seems, back to b1, putting more pressure here. Then he plays bishop to e6, now threatening checkmate in 1. Checkmate in 1 always good. I play g3. That's a tempo against the queen. So maybe that's the solution. Knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, knight to d2, attacking that pawn. Potentially game winning if I gain it. He plays queen h4, defending that pawn. Then I simply play g3. The knight is covering the light squares. This queen's going to have to move away. She can't go to g4 or f4 due to the pawn and my queen respectively covering those squares. And then, since she can no longer defend this pawn and has to move the queen with no threats, I don't know where she'll put them, maybe here, I will then follow up with knight takes pawn, winning. Then knight to c5 and continue the attack. Okay, so yeah, I think I'm tactically justified. Let's see what black does now in this situation. Will it be queen? No. Okay. It will not be queen to h4. Now, the rules of chess, Russian schoolboy textbook says never push pawns in front of your king. But I'm going to tell you right now, any chess rule that says never is wrong, because there are exceptions, there are exceptions to the exceptions, and there are exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions. I have these pawns next to each other for the very reason that they support each other's advance. If they're not supporting each other's advance, then what difference in the name of Sam Hill does it make to have them together? These pawns have the lust to expand, as Nimzovich said. They want to move forward, and they will in the endgame, usually supported by the king. So, yes, The point is, yes, there are advantageous times when you're going to push your pawns in front of your king, and that is the correct thing to do. Never say never push your pawns in front of your king. G3 may have been exactly one of those cases in point. Even with the light squared bishop on the board, potentially taking advantage of those weakened light squares, and my light squared bishop being away on a mission, a secret diplomatic mission tucked away on the A2 square. G3 might have been the key there. Maybe. We'll look at it with the computer later. But now I have knight takes pawn. I didn't really consider at the time whether there is some sort of tactical refutation for black where I can't take this pawn. It's actually a poison pawn. Did I overlook anything? Because yes, the knight on e4 will be unprotected. It is on a file leading my queen, but there's way too much traffic right now. This break could come. So this break could come. So maybe that's the concept black is going to try here. Knight takes pawn. Now the break comes because he's threatening pawn takes pawn and then snack the knight. My knight on e4 though, first of all I can just take the, okay, if I take the pawn, then the queen recaptures, and looky there. Look at that. But then I have bishop b2, and you know why I have that, folks? Because my queen is covering the second rank. By the way, never to move your pawns in front of the king. Well, if I do move my pawns in front of my king, my queen is controlling the vacuum beneath. And my queen is right now going to be covering the light squares on my king's side. If I weaken them, because my bishop can no longer do that, the queen has taken up that duty, and that's fine. The bishop has bigger fish to fry along the a2 to g8 diagonal with the e6 pawn stick there like a sore thumb. I don't have to necessarily take this pawn right away. Because I believe queen to h4 defending the pawn still allows me to play g3 and pick it up. Notice that the light squared bishop is denied the very dangerous long light squared diagonal that leads like a highway into my position. There will be some risk of playing g3, honestly. There will be some risk against a duchy type thing. It'll backwards this f pawn on the Dutch f file, which will become open. This bishop has not got into the game yet. Neither have the rooks, but you know what? Mine haven't either. My bishop is not in the game yet, other than maybe defending this a3 square from queen predations. I want to play this next rather than grab the pawn, and that's fancy schmancy. But now with his pieces out of the game and my pieces in, I've got him outnumbered. And chess is a numbers game, folks. If you outnumber your opponent, particularly in the endgame, that's how you win. You don't really have to be sophisticated. If you have numbers, you can do brute force exchanges, and you end up with the advantage as a sheer matter of winning the attrition battle. And if he does have equal material, but the material is not in use, then you will be able to use your material first, and going first in chess is where all the advantage lies. You want to be first. It's like boxing. You want your punch to land first. You first, right? You first. Just like in boxing. The simplest method, though, is not to get fancy and take, but then this comes. And I'm a little worried about that because it is freeing for him. This is a freeing maneuver for him, not an equalizing maneuver. Right now Julia's in trouble. She's in bad trouble. I'm going to develop, and it's going to be bishop here. Queen can come here. Now queen threatening the bishop and the pawn. I got to be careful of this. Doesn't look too fruitful, but it does cause complications. And if the A pawn drops for some reason, this B pawn can and will be next. Suggesting perhaps the move here is to ignore this pawn, which is going nowhere, will never be defended by another pawn, thanks to the doubled situation on the E file. Moving the rook to B1. Why? That prevents the queen from coming to B4. The queen then also cannot come to A3 because the dark square bishop is covering it. And I've added additional protection to the B pawn, which could become a target. The B pawn also keeping the knight completely out of the game. Surprisingly, black has not gone for moving his bishop to the vacated C8 square. Funny, the king B8 was his last move. We talked about the irony here of castling queenside and then having to take another move to move the king to B8, suggesting this file was going to come open, suggesting that yes, this is the plan. I can always avoid everything by moving to D5. So let's take a look at that. Again, let's say I greedily capture the material, kind of providing more scope for my queen on the second rank, which may be important. And even more importantly, gaining a material advantage, which gives me winning chances in addition to already having most of the positional trumps in this position, if not all of them. Black, I guess, does have pawn breaks, right? And I currently don't have a great pawn break. Well, this is not bad. I just got to get this. I just got to finish. Chasing material, not a good way to finish. I can reposition the knight to the G3 square. Knight on G3, often not the optimal square for a knight. In fact, sometimes some people say if you got a knight on G3 or there's a knight on G6 or the corresponding squares on the queen's side, B3 and B6, that's usually an indication something's wrong in the position. In general, I think a knight misplaced anywhere on the board is a suggestion there's something wrong in the position. And we can see that canary in the Coleman right here in the body of the knight on A7. And the reason why knights being in bad squares is so indicative of a problem is because the knight is a short-range piece and it takes time to get it back into the game. In this case, the knight would have to go to C8, made available by the king shuffling to his right, and then come to either the B6 or the D6 squares. That takes time, and believe me, I'm going to use that time well, chess fans. I'm going to get my rooks going, most likely during that time. So it looks like taking is the process. If the queen comes to H4, I don't necessarily have to play G3. Well, I can't play G3. He's gonna take. So was I hallucinating? I don't know. You're gonna have to look at the tape. But I can pinwheel my queen to the F file. Just a little scary because there could come pressure quickly down that file. And no. The queen is going to be a little vulnerable here. I mean, the knight. It's going to be vulnerable here to this queen H4 nonsense. So what if we do something rather silly, but I want the knight defending on the F file. It shuts down, makes life a little harder for the rooks on the half open file in the F file, but more importantly, it covers this H pawn, which I don't want to leave just to the defense of the king. And for that reason, I want my knight on F6. So I might have to go take queen here, threatening, What if I drop the queen back to the knight back to d2 now? He cannot fight for this square on f3, but he will undoubtedly play bishop. I keep saying it's Julia. She will undoubtedly play the bishop to e6, creating the Neanderthal attack on my h2 square, but then instead of playing my own Neanderthal move, g3, blunting it, I will play my knight safely back to the f3 square, attacking his knight and defending, or his queen, and defending my h2 pawn. But then let's say he keeps the pressure on the h file. Now he's pinned my knight to my queen. Remember, my queen not defended on this e2 square. That is an important tactical nuance in the Max Murray system. Queen often better placed on c2 where she's also undefended. So it's really difficult decision whether I want to take this pawn or not. It's a surprisingly difficult thing. Now imagine the computer has its top 3-4 moves, and they're all +2 for black, or +3, or whatever it is I have right now. I have advantage right now. It's undeniable. I have an undeniable advantage. The other option is move my rook, maybe simply to defend the queen. That's very, very passive. But now my knight can perform yeoman's work on the f1 square. Yes, the knight very far from action in the center or the queen's side. However, I've told you in the Max Murray system, I like to leave a knight alone with my king as I foray off into the distant hinterlands of the queen side with my pawn play and attacks, in this case, because he castled queen side. I like the knight around my king at all times as a defensive piece. It is an insurance policy. The knight, there's no better bodyguard for a king than the knight. More likely I'd put the rook on d1 with the idea of playing the knight to f8. I'm going to ignore this. This is bait, as they say in Mad Max Fury Road. I think this is bait. I don't want this. I don't want it. But can he come with that anyway? I mean, okay. So Max, suppose you move rook d1, preparing to sidestep black's e5 break by playing d5. What if black plays this anyway? I mean, maybe this is the threat right now. Okay, have you thought of that, Max? Huh? Maybe this is the threat right now. Then follow with the bishop and then checkmate. 1, 2, 3. Queen h4, bishop d6, queen takes h2, mate, hashtag GG. If I take knight takes pawn and he starts this rubbish, then this knight can simply retreat to the G file. Now I'm taking advantage of certain pawn structures that come out of the Dutch, which is he has broken with his F pawn and now it's a half open. But he has lost pawn potential attacking on the G file. Okay, the F pawn is gone. There's no more pawn pressure that can come from the G file by an advancing pawn down the F. You follow me? You with me there? You picking up what I'm putting down? You dig? He can put pawn pressure onto the G file by advancing the H pawn. Certainly an integral part of a kingside attack in this situation. But with his queen on H4, looking for the cheap checkmate, dime store checkmate on H2, and if I get my knight to the G3 square, then he cannot harry that knight away. If he exchanges the dark square bishop for that knight, well, now he no longer has the piece coordination in his attack. And I can play riskily and capture towards the center, or I can capture with the f pawn, and now look, the tables have been turned, and the f file in the Dutch from the player from Holland here, Julia, the tables have been turned. So that's the plan. Here we go. Let's see if it doesn't even happen. Instead, he's gone the other direction, something that I was pseudo worried about, but didn't think was of particular consequence. He's hunting the A pawn, which this might not even be a threat, chess fans. This might not even be a threat because of the discovered attack against the queen. But I don't want this construction loosened. Because I think it will unlock, if he can get rid of this A and B, it will unlock a lot of his minor pieces on the queen side, and it will prevent me from further shenanigans with my pawns, and it could even restore material equality. By moving the queen to e7, let's look at the geometry of this move. He has also vacated the e7 square. That's very important. It's not so much always where a piece goes, but where it came from is also a part of the geometry, and that means he can now develop his bishop to e7, d6 safely, and perhaps even come further out to the c file if needed. So he is creating now scope to develop his dark square bishop. That's the point. And that would connect his rooks, and he does have a half open on the f. His queen, though, moving away from the king side attack. My king is now breathing easier, and I have to attend to my queen side. However, I don't mind playing on the queen side. That's the whole thrust of my strategic play during this game entirely. Question becomes, how do I defend this a pawn? Or do I defend this a pawn? Okay, so when it's a target like this, right, you can move it, you can defend it, or you can create a worse threat. I can't move the target. Oh, I almost grabbed it and moved it. Tried to, and that would have been a mouse slip, and that could have been that could have been rather disastrous. I can defend it with a knight here on c5, since this exchange happened. If I play knight c5, I'm threatening the light squared, this bishop. But I don't necessarily want to take it because it's really cramping black's game right now, staring at it is into the backside of the e-pawn and not being able to come to the long light squared diagonal due to the thorn that is my pawn on b5. He will likely capture with the bishop. Now he has lost a dangerous attacking piece. On the other hand, he has connected his rooks, and then when I recapture the pawn, he will have restored material equality. And he will have created an opportunity to advance his e-pawn, freeing the bishop up on a fresh new diagonal, perhaps coming to f5. So I don't think this is it, okay? And obviously I can't defend the pawn with the knight thusly because that drops the piece. Again, this c3 square undefended, because I haven't quite finished my development, has been persistent. All right, so how else then, if I can't defend it with a knight, do I defend this pawn on a4? My queen can come to the rescue. She is always the backup plan for defense of the queen. We would rather defend with pawns. Pawns like to defend other pawns. That is always not always, I'd never say always and never. Pawn defending another pawn is usually the first choice. If you can't defend a pawn with another pawn, let's assume the pawn then can't move away either. Then you want to defend it with a piece. And if you can't defend it with a piece, well, then you have to defend it with your heavy pieces, and that would be a rook or a queen. Yeah, preferably a rook, but now the rook is defending the pawn, and the queen is the last one you want to have defending the pawn, because she can be driven away easily as a defender by simply being attacked, and the opportunity cost of defending a measly pawn with a 9-point queen is very high. The queen wants to be attacking. There may be no other way to defend this a4 pawn than simply queen c2. The advantage of the queen on this c2 square is often a good square for the queen in the Max Murray system for development, and often preferable to developing the queen on the e2 square. And she is staring at this c pawn, which is defended only by the king. Very tender, very, very tender spot in black's position. Another advantage is she's providing support along the second rank, meaning I can also move the bishop to d, and now I am skewering the queen on b4. Okay, so that is the defense, right? We've considered not being able to move the pawn. We've considered defending the pawn. Now we have to consider ignoring the threat and creating one of our own that's worse. That might be moving the bishop to b1, forcing the queen to do what she had already been scheming. But now I have this pawn defended twice, unfortunately only by heavy pieces. I don't think I could trap the queen. Yeah, I don't think this is good. So we're going to play here with the idea here. I'm a little loose again. That often happens after you grab material, and I'm playing without completing my development. Also, a little risky. If the queens come off for any reasons, for instance, if I decide to try to force the queens off with a move like b3, queen takes king, bishop takes queen. Queens off right now, advantageous for me because I have a material advantage. I have an advantage in the pawn structure. Black has 3 pawn islands and I have 2. Black has 3 pawn islands and I have 2. Black has an isolated pawn and I have none. Black can't yet liquidate the isolated pawn weakness because I'll just win material again. One other thing before I pick the queen and put her down on the c2 square. Very dangerous potential pin. Unfortunately, black cannot create any pawn pressure coming from the f or d files because there are no black pawns on the f or d files. And the bishop itself can't get to f5 to create that pin due to the impediment of its own pawn, but there could be a sacrifice pin. I defend the knight with a pawn. Fine, we're fine, I think. Could get messy, and I really don't want it to get messy. I want to maintain control positionally of this position. Yes, I want to maintain control positionally of this position. Now the bishop has finally moved, and the rooks are connected, and black, lo and behold, despite all the best efforts of the Max Murray opening, where I want to finish I want to be faster and develop my pieces first and finish my ending before black does, and then use that teeny, sometimes only one move advantage in my favor to commence operations. However, there is an immediate and obvious downside to putting the bishop on d6. The upside, of course, connected rooks. The upside, of course, pressure against the h2 pawn defended only by my king. The downside, reduced scope for the queen. Seriously reduced scope. Another potential downside, blocking the scope of the rook on the d8 file. by putting another piece in its way. Not that the rook had a lot of scope on that file. Anyway, I thought the rook may have to reposition, shuffle again, rightwards, just like his king had done to defend this weakness. I guess that is an advantage of moving bishop to d6. One of the advantages then is eyeing the h2 pawn and simultaneously defending the very serious weakness on c7, but that gives me an idea because it has moved into the range of my knight. My knight sitting rather loose on the e4 square. I can't exchange that knight right now for the dark squared bishop, exchanging my defensive piece for admittedly an attacking piece for black. So that's kind of a fair exchange in and of itself. Also, this is one of black's best pieces now. It is its best minor piece, unequivocally. This bishop, horrific, very horrifically, and this knight also horrific. And it can even come out now to d6. The knight still has to get back into the game and have to do that by a very circuitous route, moving all the way to c8. This capture could come, then most likely black would retake with the queen, renewing pressure on h, but the battery on the dark square is no longer as important. That would give me the advantage, quote unquote, of the two bishops. Although, honestly, I prefer playing with my knights like Chigorin. And Viswanathan Anand also apparently has a preference for knights over bishops. Despite the conventional wisdom that a bishop is worth 3.5 points, not 3, versus a knight worth 3. So this would win, quote unquote, the minor exchange, this being knight takes bishop. But there is potentially bigger fish to fry in this position, because black has not created a threat, and I can make a threat myself and attack this queen. And the question then becomes, where does she go? She is being attacked by a rook worth 5 points, and herself, in all her regal majesty, is worth 9 points. She can't take this pawn because queen takes queen. So we're going to go through every single square. She can't go here. She can't go here. She can't go here because the dark squared bishop. She can't go here. She can't go here. She can't take the rook because it's not worth it. She can't go to the C file because I can take it a number of ways. Can't go here. Can't go here. Can't go here. And can't go here. And okay, so let's look here. So here's all the squares that this queen can't go to. She can't go into any of these squares, and because you can't take your own pawn, what a change to chess that would be if you could take your own pieces. Wouldn't that be interesting? I bet there's a chess variant that allows that. She can't go to a5. Rook b1, where's she going? Rook b1. Isn't that GG? Unfortunately, these bots don't resign, and I'll have to continue playing the game. Maybe I'll pick up my speed at that point. Doesn't rook b1 just end everything? Well, no. There is an out for the queen. Do you see it? This might be a situation where you stop the video and look more carefully. Rook takes pawn will come. I'm sorry, bishop. See, I have chess dyslexia. Bishop takes h2 will come, and that is the escape hatch. But now I'm up a whole piece. Once she's off this B, and once she's away, and she won't be able to come here or here. The only two squares. Let's show it again with all the fancy colors of all the squares where this queen cannot go. Go here. Those are all the squares she cannot go, but after this bishop sacrifices itself on h2 with check, that's the point, ladies and gentlemen, chess fans, she will be able to go to the blue squares. Coming to e7 will give her a threat of winning. No, not even a threat of winning the knight. There's the check. Tactics are the servants of strategical play is the quote that Julia is making up now. Have I somehow miscalculated this whole thing? Is this Greek gift sacrifice literally, ladies and gentlemen, chess fans, with no minor pieces on my king side at all to buttress that attack, with only a rook, a rook and 3 pawns are the only pieces to follow up on my king side, and they are not in any sane definition of the word following up, because the rook is stuck behind its pawns, and the pawns are all on their starting squares except for e5, which will result in the loss of a pawn, but could become strategically important. My queen potentially overloaded. This still very much out there as a threat. How do I get there? It's not clear yet how I conduct the final attack. For this, it could be that bishop wasn't the best move, maybe something like that. But this wins a piece, and I'm not going to argue with the winning of a piece. The queen comes to the blue square. If you remember, I shaded that square in blue on e7. That's the obvious. Now, question is, do I want to proceed with my development and let this check happen? Or do I want to just get out of the check and give the queen no? This is what I call, again, the accelerator move, because I will have to respond to this threat, and there's only one move. That's king g8. And then the queen will be able to jump off again from the h4 square. Attacking the knight, though, is not not a thing, but maybe a sacrifice and then a pin. We're just gonna avoid all the complications. That's how Petrosian used to play chess. Tigran Petrosian, former world champion, known as the drawing master, draw. He was perhaps the greatest drawing master in all of chess history, even more than Schlechter, also another drawing master. Maybe Petrosian, Schlechter, they're in the same category. Petrosian's in the conversation with Schlechter. Schlechter, probably the greatest drawing master of all time. Petrosian is in that conversation. But his idea, let me get to the point, was to simply sidestep all the tactics. At the time Petrosian was playing, when there were many very strong players in Russia, when Russia was dominating world championship chess, the Russian school of chess was in full swing, and he was faced off against players like Tal and Spassky and other attacking masters, and his response was to play stunted openings like the French defense and to get out of the way of tactics and things. What that caused, and this is the real point, this is the point of the point, was he was more aware of the threats that could happen to him than his opponent. And it was said that Petrosian would sometimes guard against a threat that the opponent hadn't even seen, but at a cost. And this is the point to the point to the point, was he would sometimes forget his own opportunities in the position by focusing so much on his opponent's threats. I just don't want to allow this. So I'm moving my king to g8. Was there a better move in this position? Maybe. Black has now played the move pawn c6. Advantage. Defends the a5 target. So this is out. Disadvantage. The knight is deprived of that square when it tries to escape from its cubbyhole on a7. meaning the knight must come to the square d6 where I could exchange it currently with my knight on e4, but I don't think my knight's going to remain here very long because of the Petrosian type situations. I don't like defending it with my queen, and I could play, that's an interesting idea. I could, and that might be the move. It's slow, it's somewhat ponderous, it's somewhat weakening on the king's side, but I have now supported a knight in the center. I have also created luft for my king to escape along the second rank. Remember, I'm not so afraid to move my pawns in front of my king with my queen being able to support the vacuum. I have weakened the dark squares, but the dark square bishops are off. Mine is not, by the way, and I intend to capitalize on that. I will have a backwards pawn in the sense it's trapped behind its own knight on e4, but my plan is really to get this bishop here. And I could do that in a number of ways. Queen d3 possibility. Most likely a rook lift, which I have to do anyway. There is still potential maybe for opening the queen side pawn structure up by sacrificing the bishop on a5, pushing b6, and that would support my rook. That's a check. That could cause issues for me. This break coming, perhaps. He has moved his pawns in front of the king, the thing, of course, the textbooks say you're never supposed to do. Meaning if this breaks comes, he's a little looser here. Queen b6 allows immediately the move bishop a3. These two bishops now raking down this way. Do I have to play f3 right now? That would also shorten the half-open file in F, the Dutch file here for the Dutch player Julie rated 1800 chess.com bots. By moving b6, there is a hole, significant hole, on c6 because a knight on that square forks a lot of pieces, a family fork, rook, king, and queen. However, it is geometrically speaking 2 squares on the diagonal away from the knight, requiring my knight to make 3, count them 3 moves minimum to get there. I have not connected my rooks. I so have to do that. Then I can really shut things down. Should I just simply move my bishop to b2 here, connecting the rooks, defending my strong point, further discouraging e5, which is in play right now? It would cause some problems for him. Let's do that. I mean, I don't know if this is the best move. I don't like leaving this knight flapping in the breeze. Here comes a sacrifice. I briefly considered, wasn't speaking at stream of consciousness, I thought maybe bishop takes. He's going to win 2 pieces for the pawn. I agree for the piece. I agree that's not so bad. He will have some 2 connected passed pawns on the queen side. Again, that's not so bad. It might be a fair trade. The fact that it's 2 pawns for a piece to get a double pass pawn on the queen side connected may be compensation. But he could drop a piece here again because there is this tactic. So without much thought, I think we just have to take this because the game is running long and I'm getting tired. But let's look at it. So pawn takes knight, bishop takes pawn. The bishop is now attacking this rook. Agreed. I can accelerate the rook away by moving it to the c file. Now I'm threatening mate or close to it on c7. Black responds to that threat. Then I can play bishop a3. It looks like I lose my bishop, but I get the piece back. We're going to go through it in real time. My rooks are connected now. This is a bigger threat. Bigger threat. So remember, when there's a threat, I can defend the piece, I can move the piece away, or I can create a bigger threat. The bigger threat is bishop a3 to take the queen off. She has no checks to get out of the way because I've conveniently moved my king back to g1 in safety. She can, however, take the bishop, and that would be an exchange of bishops. Then what does she do from here? Not much. Or I can move my rook away. Threaten. I still have this coming. This is actually not a threat. Now I'm noticing, I've been talking about my queen defending my second rank, but the black queen doing the same thing right now from the e7 square. Remember, that was the blue square. Whoops, blue square. That suggests to me that this might be the best move. I can keep it in my pocket. Of course I can keep it in my pocket. The queen now on the blue square of e7, performing important defense of that c pawn, so now black doesn't have to shift his king to c8 to defend it into really a passive position for that rook. However, the queen herself is tethered to the defense of a pawn, and we've talked about this. The queen does not, a 9-point queen does not want to be defending a 1-point pawn. Okay, that transaction doesn't add up. Those numbers don't add up. The balance sheet. Okay, the double accounting. 9 points defending 1 point doesn't make mathematical sense. And she will not be able to move away without a very serious queen takes pawn check threat, probably mate. I have now a lot of firepower on. If I move my rook to the c file, I have a lot of firepower coming this way. I could counter-sacrifice on these pawns to just rip things open, and then we finish the game in grand style, attacking in the direction of our pawns, which we began after move 5, after the Maximary opening was partially complete, and we turned to the development of our queen side. This has always been the plan, chess fans. If we do trade bishops, I do have a pawn advantage. It lessens my attack, I feel. My dark squared bishop, though, has been really not productive in this game at all, but could become so. Now it's kind of a shame to lose it. I can also I have a knight move here, taking over the b4 square myself at some point. But I want to anchor this knight in the center. That's the plan for that knight, where it controls very important squares in black's camp. I do want to continue preventing or discouraging the pawn break. e5 by black by retaining my bishop.
Okay, so we're going to just move out of the threat. What is the follow-up? I'm trying to think. That's not the move. What is the follow-up here? I don't see. Is there another side? I don't see any follow-up for black at all. The rooks are connected. It could get a little it could get hairy, like I'm saying. But once I play here with my queen providing support, my knight firmly ensconced and still relatively close to my king, I should have no problems defending. I am up the material equivalent at this moment in time of 4 pawns. I should be okay with this. He's coming. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit, as I'm sure this game is running long. But once I beat Julia 1800, and it's looking like that is going to be the case, then we can get to the 1900s, and that's when I believe things will heat up in the kitchen. Waking up, he woke up the rook on h8 and moved it to f8, putting pressure on the f pawn, also preparing a rook lift, perhaps to f5, or that's really the only rook lift square, then maybe doubling the heavy pieces on the h file, leading with the queen, but coming to h1 checkmate. Very simple, right? This bishop, though, is hanging pieces drop off, and I still have a tactical maneuver, which is now of dire consequence to black, because one, by waking up the rook and moving it to f8, yes, you are now on your Dutch Open file, Julia, granted. But you have created a geometric situation where your queen and your rook are on the same predatory file or diagonal a3, f8, to my dark squared bishop, which has been waiting patiently in the wings this whole time on the c file for just such an opportunity, on the c1 square, for just such an opportunity. That will force the queen off. Okay, so let's calculate, because it could be mate. Bishop a3. The queen takes the bishop, because the bishop is not defended on the a3 square. She is and was the only defender of c2, c7, which is now gobbled up by my queen. Check. Black has one and only one move. He is fairly safe for the moment on this light square diagonal. Remember, I said that if black can get this construction, a king on a8 and his light squared bishop on b7, that is surprisingly defensible. And I will have lost my dark squared bishop. So but after this check, I'm not going for the mate necessarily. At that point, I'm going for rook takes bishop. But then my back rank is now vulnerable, and there's a check. No, because there is no check, because my queen is covering the rook. So I've taken this rook with my rook is here, my queen is here, his queen is here on a3. The dark square bishop is gone. The light square bishop is on pre, but then I just follow up with check. Here, rook takes, and I'm threatening mate. Maybe he tries to defend by moving a second rook. It's probably mate. This leads probably to mate. I'm giving material back, but I don't see the actual mate. I'm going to calculate now, maybe fewer arrows, just kind of talking it through. Bishop a3, queen takes bishop, queen takes pawn, check. King a8, rook takes bishop, maybe bishop to c8. Queen takes rook, rook takes rook, rook takes rook check. He's no more. I don't think I have to play this flashy move. This may be the correct move, but I'm going to go with my usual cop-out of I can't do all the calculation. I might have something simpler but similar. Suppose I move the dark square bishop, which has been so patient throughout this whole game on the c1 square, and I put it on c3. Now I'm threatening this bishop, but even more to the point, I'm threatening bishop takes a5, and black cannot recapture because the check on the b file. I think that's the way I'm going to play. That, however, prevents an immediate threat here, which is kind of what I want to play, and I might get the lift. When the lift starts coming, I will play, maybe should play right now, f3. I can vacate my king to f2 as needed and even bring a rook to the h file myself once my king has left the first rank. If I make this bishop move again, such as here, my knight is covered, but I'm a little sketchy about that. Most likely if I go here, black will defend the bishop with the pawn, and that may just actually shut everything down for me. Now he's got the equivalent of 4 pawns, because what is a bishop other than just a giant pawn? He's got the equivalent of 4 pawns. So this doesn't really work. In fact, he can't respond to that. I might be back to being forced to make a good move. I don't want to open up any more files. This is the key. This gives material back, and I'm up the equivalent of 4 pawns, so why give 3 of those 4 points back? Okay, so I get this. The king has to move. I take this. He takes that. It's probably mate in here. This probably leads to rate. Okay, we've been going on for a long time. At a minimum, I don't even have to take this pawn. I could just capture the bishop. The black queen a little off sides now over here on a3. He's down more material again. And I reserve the option of playing here. Maybe the queen will go back again to the blue square. I can... Yeah. All right. Let's find out what happens. I haven't calculated it precisely, but I do have an out, which is bishop. Rook takes bishop right now. So now with it on the board, we can see it a little easier. He's got to do something. The key moment for him is when I have a queen on c7 and I've just taken the bishop with my rook. This is the key moment when I have a rook on b5, a queen on c7, and his king is on h8. How is he going to prevent the mate? He can't prevent it along the second rank. He could move here. And that is sort of a X-ray, and I think that would force queen takes rook, rook takes rook, rook check here. My rooks are in a weird spot. I'm going to cop out, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to cop out. Why did I cop out? I can't fully calculate the consequences of queen takes pawn check. And black has taken the liberty to cover the pawn. Well, okay, yes. He's got the pawn covered, not by the queen on the blue square anymore, where she was not a particularly efficient defender in terms of her opportunity cost for doing other things, but now black has also lost his opportunity cost of doing a rook lift, which he couldn't do anymore with my rook on B. Light squared bishop being oppressed currently by the royalty, clergy against royalty. I'm up a material equivalent of 4 points. This is rather nasty for him because it threatens this rook, which is likely to attack it. I can put the rook here. I'm still covering the knight, but now things are a little loose because I'm gobbling so much material that my pieces are losing coordination. This pawn is pinned now by the bishop. If I shore up the queen, the knight with f3, I retain this threat, which he's now going to have to defend. I have not grabbed more material, granted. On the other hand, I've not increased the chaos even further. The chaos I'm concerned about is, well, what am I mean, how can you play chess and not be concerned about chaos? Chess is chaos. Chess is a leap into the great unknown because we simply don't and can't. Not even the best chess computers can fully determine what the best move is. We often don't know exactly what's going on. I have a loose piece here. My queen potentially overloaded. That's my concern. My queen is covering 3 pieces. And that really puts me at risk. There's a lot of risk associated with that. I can move rook down here and try to just kick this pawn. There's a pin. I can move the rook to B, connecting the rooks again. And threatening here, sort of. Eventually threatening here, which might be the way to go, and then just try to finish him down the A file. It's a rather novel way to play this position. Almost certainly not the computer's favorite move here. The knight can't get closer to the enemy king. I can't worry this rook, so this knight can actually spring into action, increasing the pressure here, coordinating the knight and the bishop. That may be the move, chess fans. This might be the move. Now my queen is no longer having to support another mouth. It doesn't have another mouth to feed, another piece to defend. She does, in theory, she could, if she wanted to, snap off the completely irrelevant, at the moment, h7 pawn at some point. Okay, he's going to have to move the rook. He wants to stay, obviously, in contact with the c7 pawn. Perhaps he'll come to the e file, but now when this... Ooh, and then this knight here, this is just deadly for him. The more I look at this, the more this move shouts out to me because of the cascading effect of the knight move. So let's do it without further ado. This rook is loose. That does give black the potential for accelerator moves by creating threats against it. But those squares are currently not available, once again, thanks to the heroic actions of my queen, which has done a tremendous job during This one problem moving the knight away is f2 becomes a target. So rook takes pawn with my knight. Suppose I move my knight away, okay? And suppose he does something really wild like rook takes pawn. Well, this is going to kill him. He's just going to die. He's just going to die. It's going to be a mate, maybe, or close to it. And I can even just take the rook. Okay, this is can't be anything. He's doubling. He's doubling against f, and I don't want to allow that. Primarily because that queen can't be further overloaded on that f. I can win, now be up the equivalent of 6 pawns, and I'm grinding him down. He does retain defenses along his second rank. Yeah. Okay, we're simple chess. Now maybe I want to lift this rook, which was loose, but I can grab more material. And this queen, as long as I keep here, so that's what I'm just going to do. We're playing simple chess. No counterplay in sight yet from black. Now lashing out with the c pawn, something that had been prevented by the move knight to c6 on move 4. He couldn't move this c pawn. Now finally it's coming out. Too little, perhaps too late. Taking the pawn, queen can't take my pawn. Wow, I mean, this is just, the wheels have completely come off the wagon for white. Again, I am spoiled for choice. I can take this one. If I take that one, the rook becomes loose. That's a little, there could be an accelerator move against it. But if I take this one, I'm threatening to take that one. If I don't take it, these pawns could advance. That's really his only. If I take it and the queen takes, the queens come off. And I have such a... All right, we're just going to take what he gives me. If I take it, he could pin it. That's not bad. That's not bad. It slows me down a little bit. And he is coordinated from the pinning position. He is coordinated on that c5 square, no question. This pawn cannot advance. If I take here and I'm threatening check, and with the discovery, you might have to put the rook here. That might be the time I want to... All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to... If I ignore this, and suppose he takes here, the queen can come all the way down. It's probably the end for him at that point. He comes to the second rank. It is defended. Too many good moves. Everything is winning, no doubt. Liquidating material makes the most sense despite all the tactics. We're just going to continue to gobble material. We're going to continue to gobble material. Rook takes pawn, possibly rook takes pawn. Attempt to get fancy, queen, no. Okay, rook takes pawn, he tries to get fancy himself with a suicidal rook. Then rook to b3 and accelerator square. Oh no, he'll play. Yeah. I don't want this. I don't want to make that a choice for him. Let's just keep winnowing the material here. Rook here. That's kind of what I don't like. But now I have check. All right. And I'm sorry, chess fans, but we're going to end it thusly. We're just going to take everything. You hear me, chess fans? We're just going to take everything. How do I take advantage of this? Where's the mate? We'll play quickly because it's over at this point. Check is coming. Trapdoor. Is it coming along the second rank? No time to gobble pawns. Just go here. Now I'm threatening mate. Now I'm threatening mate on A8. And that's it. Well, it's not mate. He can interpose. Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. What about this? He's going to play Ring Around the Rosie around my own piece. Where's the mate? I don't want him escaping to this square. Create the mating net. Where's the mate? Do I need to bring my king in? Currently, the king has 2 squares. That's good, so there's no stalemate. There's a check here or here. Has the same. I'm going to try to checkmate him somehow like this. Kind of an old-fashioned mate this way. Old school mate. Okay, that's it. That's the checkmate that you were looking for, chess fans. That's the last of the 1800 bots down. I'll have to say that game seemed to go well for me. I was never in any sort of trouble. I believe I had all the positional trumps. And it Julie went down with a whimper, never having really gotten anything going for herself. No doubt I missed some things. We'll find out what those are in my evaluation. Not we, I. You will not be part of that, but thank you for following. Tomorrow, it's upwards and onwards. We're going against the 1900 chess bots. Take care. Ta-ta.